Hey, I'm Josh Brown, and I am a Christian, a follower of Christ. I am a husband, I am a father, I'm a pastor of a new church here in Rapid City called Redeeming Grace Church, and I'm a reader. I love to read books. It's just kind of the way God's wired me. There's a couple reasons why I read as many books as I do. One is because God has just given me a brain that needs a lot of content, needs a lot of things to chew on, and I just found that I am a better person if I am reading books. I'm a better husband, better father, better pastor if my mind is engaged a lot on content and thinking through things and applying it and wisdom and all those kinds of things that comes with reading for me. I don't know if you're like that. Most people I've found are not like that, but that's okay. The second reason why is not just kind of how God's wired me, but also the role that I play as a pastor is that I am trying to help people come to know Jesus Christ and then follow him effectively in a world that's crazy. And so books are super helpful for helping people understand what the gospel really is, and what Christianity is really all about, and how to walk in that. Christians have always been a people of the book, and that has always spun off then writings and reflections about the book and how to apply that in the world. And so I want people to be good at figuring out what the world's like, what God is like, what the Christian life is like, what church is like. And there's so many books out there that I try to consume a lot of content so that then I can just recommend what is the best stuff out there. Do not, please, if you are interested in Christianity or wanting to grow in something, do not just go on to christianbook.com or to Books A Million and just kind of randomly select something. Some of the best stuff ever written is there, but the vast majority is some of the worst stuff that's ever written. And it blows my mind that on a web page or in a bookstore, there can be right next to each other, like their covers are touching, one of the greatest books on Christian theology that has ever been written, next to a book that will literally, if you listen to what it says, will take you as far away from Jesus as you can imagine. And it's all called Christian. And so I want to protect you from that, from just having to do kind of the random, hey, whatever looks good. And so I read a lot of stuff because I want to help you. And if you're only going to read a book or two a year, I want to make sure that you're not wasting your time on stuff that's not actually true, not really actually helpful. And so that's part of why I read books, is to try to help you. And for 2020, of the 61 books I read, I have 7 recommendations for anybody, especially those of you that are Christians, that I would consider, if you're going to pick up a book in 2021, consider one of these 7. And so this will be kind of a countdown here. Number 7 is Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands, People in Need of Change, Helping People in Need of Change by Paul David Tripp. This is really kind of a manual of sorts of how to be a good discipler of people. How do you get to the heart of what's really going on in people's lives? And how can you be used of God to be an agent of transformation, to see the gospel actually transform them? And so there's lots of great illustrations. There's lots of great practical help. This thing is very much made to be like, grab it and go. Like, read it, understand what's going on, experience heart change through the gospel yourself, and then be the kind of person, be an agent of the kingdom, be an agent of Jesus, be an ambassador of reconciliation in the life of others. Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands. Kind of thick, but that's because he's just very practical and laying things out. So that comes in at number 7 for me. Number 6 is Free to Believe by Luke Goodrich. Luke Goodrich is a lawyer with the Becket Fund. He argues religious liberty cases before the Supreme Court. He has never lost. And he just puts together a very brilliant, easy-to-read book where he breaks down key cases that he's been involved in related to religious liberty in the United States. And what he's doing is he's trying to get Christians to understand what the issues really are and what it really means for religious liberty to be protected and sustained here in the United States. He also does a lot of recommendations and advice to Christians that's just phenomenal. And he points out where Christians are not being helpful in the fight for religious liberty. They think they're being helpful and they're not. And he lays that out. And then he also lays out how Christians really can protect and enjoy religious liberty and what that actually looks like. So would very much, if you are concerned about the direction of our country or are concerned about religious liberty issues, man, this is a great accessible book that will walk you through real life cases that are going on or have recently gone on, and this guy will walk you through it in a very godly way. So Luke Goodrich's Free to Believe coming in at number 6. Number 5, Conscience by Andy Naselli and J.D. Crowley. Conscience, What Is It? How to Train It, and Loving Those Who Differ. In 2020, we have had a lot of Christian conscience issues come at the church, and frankly, very few churches have handled those things well. Things that are conscience issues, not biblical morality issues per se, are tearing churches apart, whether that's related to COVID, whether that's related to masks and lockdowns, or whether that's related to decisions that pastors are making in their churches or congregation members. The George Floyd, social justice kinds of things, political things are tearing the church apart because we do not understand what conscience is, how we align it with the Bible and what the Bible really actually says, and then how we live with those who have different convictions in unity within our church. So this book is exactly what our churches need right now, and I led our church to read through this together. And I think this book, at least in part, is why our church really navigated this whole 2020 season without too much trouble. I think at least in part is because we had enough of our people reading and studying and discussing this together that they set the kind of example for the rest of the congregation that we're a pretty happy church. And we don't all think the same about a lot of conscience issues. And this book really helped us with that. So you're just going to be, I think, a happier person. I think a godlier person, a more charitable person, a more convictional person, if you really understand what the conscience is, how to train it according to the Bible, and how to love those who are different from you. So I would commend that to you. It's very, very helpful in this particular season. Number 4, The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield, a practicing radically ordinary hospitality in our post-Christian world. So Rosaria Butterfield was a tenured professor at Syracuse, and she was one of the primary academics for the LGBTQ movement. She was one of the leading scholars on that front. She was herself a practicing lesbian, and she was beginning to write an academic work studying the religious right, particularly as how they have interacted culturally with some of these LGBTQ movements. And in the course of that, she met a pastor and his wife who she vehemently disagreed with. And this pastor and his wife were just tremendously kind, and over the course of a couple of years, regularly had her in their home around the dinner table, eating meals with her, not treating her as the repugnant cultural other, not shunning her or pushing her away, but just lovingly, in the context of their own hospitality, sharing the good news of Jesus with her. And over time, she became convinced, and she left her lifestyle. She then married a man who was himself a pastor, or became a pastor, and now she and her husband serve in a church, and they do a ton of foster care and adoption. They do just radically ordinary hospitality, and it is phenomenal. And what she's arguing in the book is, it's kind of a memoir talking about her experiences of how God has used their radical hospitality to bring people to faith in Christ. And then she's also arguing, like, hey, in this post-Christian world where it seems like people are moving further and further from the gospel, hospitality by gospel people is the key. She's like, that's what got to me, and I was as hardened to Christianity as anyone. And she's like, I'm telling you, it will work. Radically ordinary hospitality is the key. So to reaching this post-Christian society, it's going to be the warmth and love of our homes that is going to soften people's heart to consider the claims of Jesus Christ and be saved. So The Gospel Comes with a House Key, Rosaria Butterfield. Really stirring, jarring book that will really kind of make you think about your relationship to the world, and how people who maybe seem like they would never come to faith in Christ, how they're being won to Christ, and it's through hospitality. Number 3, The Creaking on the Stairs, Finding Faith Through Childhood Abuse by Mez McConnell. Mez McConnell is a pastor in Scotland, and he also runs a ministry that plants churches in some of the poorest, roughest areas of Scotland. And this book is all about him recounting his story of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse as he was growing up. It's very jarring, and he's very specific as he just recounts what he has gone through. It's brutal. And then what happened is that he ended up becoming very hardened, and himself spent time in prison before coming to faith in Christ. And he just recounts how the gospel is actually the resources for healing for anyone who's been abused. And he walks through that. He's very honest. He's very candid, and he very much shows how the gospel relates to that. So if you have experienced some sort of abuse, I think that Mez will help you kind of process through that. It won't be an easy read, but it'll be helpful to kind of trace, to walk in his footsteps, to see how the gospel really is the answer to long-term healing in your life, and forgiveness and restoration. And if you're the kind of person who knows someone who's been abused and you just want to understand a little bit more of how to help, this book will be helpful too. So every pastor, I think, should read this. Everyone who wants to be effective in ministering to those who've been abused, this book, I think, will be a great thing for you to have available to you. So The Creaking on the Stairs by Mez McConnell. Number 2, I just finished this yesterday. I loved this book. Made for Friendship by Drew Hunter. The relationship that halves our sorrows because you share them, and doubles our joys because you share them. So he does a great job of just laying out how important friendship is, that that's actually part of the created order, that God created us to be in friendship with one another, and that it needs to take a higher priority in the life of Christians, in the life of the church. It needs to be a higher priority in your life, is real, meaningful friendships. And he walks you through how to do that and why biblically that's really important. And actually, God himself calls himself a friend to Abraham. Jesus calls himself a friend of sinners. And so this book is just very, very well done. It's brief. It's got discussion questions in it. It's great to walk through with somebody. He really stirs your heart and draws you towards, makes you appreciate the friendships you have and want them to go deeper. And it makes you want to cultivate more friendships and make more time for friendships. And he does just such an excellent job in this book of laying this out. So just, I'm going to actually get a copy and try to give this to as many people in my church, at Redeeming Grace Church, because I think this is an area where we're a little bit deficient right now. So I'm going to actually give this book to as many of the people in our church and have us read it together as possible, because I think this is going to be key to our church being healthy. Okay? Lastly, a book that would probably compete for one of the best books I have ever read in any year ever is Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund, The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. Man, this is just medicine for the soul. It is just straight gospel. And what it is he takes the verse where Jesus describes his own heart, and he describes his own heart. It's fascinating. He doesn't describe his own heart as holy and sovereign, or he describes it as gentle and lowly. Now, those things might be true, but Jesus, at his essence, when he's describing the one place where he describes the natural disposition of his own heart is gentle and lowly towards sinners and sufferers. And so he just unpacks over several scriptures, unpacks what that means for a person, that Christ is gentle and lowly. And he just traces through the Bible this sense of who God is and his disposition towards people. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. It's sound. What I've found is that I've handed this book out. I think I've given away like 25 copies of this already, and I need to get more to give away. Is that people have read the book and liked all the chapters, but it seems like there's always 1 or 2 or 3 that just really is like, man, that changed my life kind of chapter. And what's fascinating is it's been a different chapter for different people. So what you'll find is if you pick this book up, and this would be my number 1 recommendation for you, is that read the whole thing. But you might find that some chapters strike you as more compelling, more life-giving than others. But if you read this, you're going to fall in love with Jesus more. Just be warned. You will be drawn in by his heart. His heart will capture your heart as you see him masterfully unfolded in this wonderful book. So those are my top 7 of 2020 that I read. These are new books that I read this year. My next video will be for pastors and church leaders, some new books that I read that I really enjoyed. And then I'm also going to, on my blog post my top 10 favorites, the favorites that I had. And some of these will be in there and some of them won't. This will be my favorites. These are my recommendations for you. The next video will be recommendations for pastors and church leaders. And then on my blog, I'll go ahead and post my top 10, just ones I enjoyed the most, whether they were Christian or not Christian. So if you want other recommendations on books, you can check out my Goodreads. I track all of my reading on Goodreads. I think I've got about 500 books that I've read on there, and I've rated them. And so you can kind of see that maybe something I recommended didn't grab you, but there might be something else I read that didn't strike me as great, but you might find interesting. So you can find it there. And then let me know. I'm going to go after another 60 to 70 books in 2021. So if there's a book that you really enjoyed, share that with me, because I'd love to read good books next year as well. So hope this helps you. And thanks for taking a few minutes to kind of consider one of these books.